and welcome to the Dark Side. This is your weekly show looking at all things the dark side, anti-racism, politics, and education. This is discussion, this is debate, this is education. I am Tabitha Purple, and my co-host for today is TC Storm. As always, welcome, Mr. Storm. How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm just getting some chocolate, some of the good stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you have good stuff chocolate there. That's always wonderful. Well, today's show is going to be one of our cram all the noise stories in we can in one go episodes. This is never the sometimes so much is happening in the world and you have sent us stories and we haven't got to them. So today we thought we'd try and do a little catch up on world events. And so we're going to take a whistle stop tour around the world and tell you some stuff that's happening, things to be aware of, educational points. Please join in if there are news stories we haven't covered, or if I've forgotten one of your news stories, please do let us know in the comments section. I will put up the usual reminder that needs to go up. There you go. Something like that. All right. So you ready, Mr. Storm?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to begin our show today in the Netherlands. I got sent a story by one of our Dutch viewers. They thought this was worthy of a dark side story. So the 150 years abolition of the slave trade centenary or anniversary is a better word, is coming up next year. 2023 is the 150 years in the Netherlands. Bear in mind that some other European countries have long celebrated their 150 years. So the Netherlands is the last of the European countries to abolish slavery that we know. And so they are having their celebration next year. With that comes a flurry of activity, including the Prime Minister here going to, Rutte was in Suriname. And while there, he was making statements that, you know, it's about time that we started to face up to our past. And so there is going to be a full apology. And so the person who sent this to me was very excited that we should cover this. I feel less excitement, I have to be honest, because within the apology is a lot of buts. We're apologizing, but there'll be no reparations. We're apologizing, there's a 200 million euro fund, but 27 million of it is already earmarked for a museum of slavery in the Netherlands. So but is a big word in the apology. And then, you know, some of the cabinet have said, you know, look, we've already done apologies and reparations to the Jewish people from the Holocaust and that we harmed. We've done this for the Indonesians. Isn't it time that we do it for Black people? But, you know, we don't want this to be solely a race thing. So we need to consider how we integrate our full Dutch society into this process. There were too many buts in the statement for me, or in Dutch we say maar. But nevertheless, I'm sure we have a few things to say. It's going to be an interesting year next year because there are a number of books. There are lots and lots of work being done. Most of the projects, and I hope to get to a project in December for a book club that we do here with an Amsterdam group that do work on anti-racism work in the Netherlands. They do brilliant work. For the life of me, their name has escaped me right now, but hopefully we'll be getting to visit them in December. They're putting on a full display at the museum and so on and so forth. There's been lots of the Rijksmuseum have done stuff, you know, other museums are doing stuff for the 150 years to incorporate learning. What concerns me? So these are my concerns. I've read some of the educational textbooks that are given to students here, and the impression that students are left with, and those students grow up to be adults, is that the bad people did slavery and the rest of us didn't know. And so when you have a population that has this idea that it was the bad ones that participated in slavery, and those bad people should be dealt with. It allows for scapegoating. It also allows for a certain amount of cognitive dissonance to the wealth and luxury that you enjoy as a country and the privilege that you enjoy as a country, and also the impact that you still have on your former colonies, the impact that you have from Curacao to St. Martin to Suriname, the impact that is still felt today in how there are two-tier systems, how people do not integrate. There are stories of the fact that, you know, when Dutch companies like to put their headquarters in those islands so that they can avoid high Dutch taxes, but that doesn't mean the people of the islands are benefiting. And when their workforce is there, they don't speak the native language of the people. They speak Dutch and do not tend to mix or integrate into the cultural lives of the place in which they live in, and have due respect for the fact that they're living on someone else's island. So there are all kinds of challenges with this which make me feel uncomfortable. And I think maybe something we can do is, if somebody knows someone who's willing to come on and talk about this from a Dutch perspective, I think this would be really good, because I think there are so many nuances to the conversation of how people feel about it, but also how the education system has played a huge part in numbing and nullifying the conversation around slavery. Because we're so educated about it, because we know, we're open that it happened, we're okay. But when you read the actual content, it leaves a lot, and I'm putting that mildly, a lot to be desired. Mr. Storm, what are your thoughts on this apology that's coming?
Well, you said there's a lot of butt in it, and I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of butt in it. And when you put the Dutch mar and butt together, yeah, there's more butt out of this. Yeah. Here's the reality. Yeah, it's all nice, the apologies coming, but let's look at the condescending and colonial attitude that it's coming in. And by that I mean, okay, so we set up a 200 million euro fund, but we're going to tell you how to use it. Right? That's a very colonial mindset. They can't, people can't manage the money for themselves. The ex-colonies can't manage money for themselves. Secondly, okay, great. Yes, establishing a museum of slavery, but you're doing it in the Netherlands. So you're taking away tourist money. So people that could actually go or be interested to go down to one of your ex-colonies to actually see the museum are now going to have to travel to put money in the white coffers of the Netherlands. Right? So I'm like, let's be real here. This isn't really done with any real altruistic interests or anything altruistic at heart. This is a self-serving measure that we're looking at here. And as much as it's self-serving, it's further than, say, somewhere like the UK or the US is going.
Yeah, like, right? Absolutely. You know, so, it's going to make the news.
But and when I think about it, in terms, it's staggering to think how low the bar is when it comes to Black people seeking justice for historic things. And as much as we use the word historic, I actually want to clarify this, because for any of our white viewers out there that are watching this, right? When you hear the word historic, it's a word that comes with baggage, and you tend to think 100, 200 years ago, right? I want to put this in context for you to understand how personal this is to people my age. And don't let the gray hair fool you. I'm not that old. This is just a sign of my wisdom, right? You have to understand, when my mother was born, she was not considered human.
Right.
When my mother was born, my mother, who is still living, she was not afforded full human rights and the
Mhm,
status as a human being.
mhm,
And
mhm.
I'm not talking about in the US,
Mm, 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 mm,
I'm
mm,
talking about in European countries,
mhm, mhm, mhm.
right? So
Yep.
when we talk about slavery and when we talk about the injustices of racism, and
Mhm,
people like to talk about it was so long ago, we need to just let it go, live and
mhm,
let go. It was in the
mhm,
past.
mhm,
No, it's
mhm.
not in the past. People are very much living with the burden of it,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so when people say, hey, it's historic, why can't you let it go? If somebody were to wrong your parents like that, would you let it go?
Mm, mm. Well, no,
Then
because
you need to add on the fact that not just were your parents living with that burden,
mhm,
but there would have been trauma associated with that. So you
mm,
as a child will be living in that trauma,
mhm, 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 mhm.
right? So this is something that directly impacted me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I'm not happy with what's been said. I don't like all the caveats that go along with it. Um, and look, the reality is, you know my position. Pretty much when somebody says the word "but," you can discard anything that went before it.
Mm, mhm, mm, yeah.
So yeah, more but.
Well, I think it's definitely one that it's gonna come up again. As I said, we are heading towards the anniversary, the 150-year anniversary, and so this issue surrounding slavery and the legacy of slavery within the Netherlands will come up again inevitably because there are going to be events, there are going to be books released, there are lots and lots of different things looking at the impact of Dutch colonialism on people of color pertaining particularly to Black people and how that has impacted their identity, their countries, their origins, the trauma that it has inflicted, etc., etc. And I think it bears saying, we're not talking about so long ago when, 150 years, people are like, oh, that's so long ago. Great grandparents, huh? Grandparents. It's not that long ago. It's within living memory of people who will have their parents will have been enslaved and
Well,
they are still alive. They were,
uh,
that's
let me just put it to you like this: the Second World War finished long before my mother was regarded as a human being,
right, right, right.
right? And yet you have the Jewish community being given reparations. But
Mhm.
here's actually something that I want to bring up. Whatever happened to the reparations for the Romani and the Black people in Germany?
Well, that's something that actually oh, I don't want to get the title wrong. The oh, they're the movement that deal with the Holocaust and its
Mhm.
reparations have fought to have and to it's the Jewish arm of it, which have fought to have and put on the table. And when you go to the museums, the first things that you see are the fact that they include and count first those from other communities because oftentimes the headline that everyone remembers is
Mhm.
6 million Jews, and no one remembers the entire Romani community, every disabled person. They don't remember those numbers, they don't speak as volumes. So the Jewish people themselves, who were in charge of I forget the group, forgive me, people, that's a whole new thing, but they actually fight for that, the inclusion of and
Yes, but
reparations
my
for
point is you have to fight for their inclusion.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. 100%, 100%. I hear you, but I'm just putting this into context, of course, and just giving a little
No,
bit.
look, I know that when you go to the Holocaust Museum, there is recognition of the fact that, hey, it wasn't just Jews that were caught up in this mess, and I
But it's
respect
not
that.
just recognition; it's actually prominence of place, and I think
Right,
to
but
recognise
my
that
my
they
point
are
is
prominence of place. Yeah.
my point is it's that it's when you're dealing with these issues, it's at a governmental level, it's at an
Yeah.
institutional level,
Yeah.
right? And it's the fact that the governments themselves
Yeah.
are reticent to recognize and make restitution to these people that were caught up in the very same horrific incident
Mhm.
that the Jews were. And so what you're having is
Two-tiered system.
compounding.
Mhm.
In fact, you know what? Let's just be real. It's no real difference to what the Nazis did in many regards. You're separating people and you're giving different people a position of prominence. When the
Mhm.
reality is, all of these people were involved in the same tragedy. They suffered similar fates, if not the same fate,
Mhm.
and you're treating them differently. It's very much, in fact, no, it's not the Nazi mentality. It's the colonial mentality of divide and conquer.
Yeah. Very much the colonial mentality, which I think introduced us nicely to our next story, which is from Switzerland. One that you sent in yourself. And I think this speaks to a colonial mentality, but I think this speaks to something even deeper, which is how do we, and this is the question I have, and you'll all hear this as the story is unfolding, how do we have the ability to reckon with our own cognitive dissonance? We live in a way that is relatively comfortable. In order to achieve that relative comfort, there are people that are enslaved to the system in order to make sure that we have relative comfort. We have great roads, we have great infrastructure, we have these good things. In order to achieve that, it's been done on the backs of people, actual human beings who have suffered. And so this story comes to us from Switzerland, but you can multiply out. But Switzerland is the country that is reckoning with this at the moment. And so children of migrants who came to work in Switzerland over decades are demanding apology for a policy they said destroyed families and left many traumatized. From the 1950s right up until the 1990s, hundreds of thousands of workers from, at first, Italy, then Spain, Portugal, and what was then Yugoslavia made the journey to Switzerland. They were forced to work, or they worked in factories, roads, building sites, restaurants, hotels. Switzerland's highly successful economy, its good infrastructure, is without a doubt due to their work. But it comes at a price. There were flaws in the system. The migrants were given 9 to 12-month permits. They lived in barracks conditions. Their only function to the Switzerland to Switzerland was their working ability, and family members were unable to join. So if they had children, they had to leave them at home. They were not permitted to come. They were not given a permit. And although husbands and wives could work together, of course, their children would have to, it was stipulated that all children would have to be left at home. So if you got pregnant, they would be returned home also. There's all of these sorts of things. And so the Swiss have what they call the forbidden children. And so people remember, this is within living memory, and it's only in 2002 that the law was finally, the seasonal work permit law was finally abolished, as Switzerland wanted to benefit from the EU's freedom of movement policy. And so they abolished it in 2002. Let's get that straight. So today, the adult children of those people from the 1950s all the way up to 2002 are demanding an apology. They believe that the Switzerland basically turned a policy of migrant workers into an abusive system in which people were held to ransom. And so the immediate pushback that people have is, well, just go home. You have children and responsibilities. But, and this is where the but comes in, if people are trying to keep poverty away from the door of their family, and this is why the progression of countries, first they came from Italy, then Italy gets a bit better, so they go to Portugal for those workers, then that gets a bit better, so they go to Yugoslavia. Wherever there is poverty is where they're specifically targeting, because they can pay them just enough to keep them out of poverty, but not high enough that they will ever be free. And so you're stuck in a system that constrains you to the system. You only get a visa for 9 to 12 months. That visa is then renewed for 9 to 12 months, and you're living visa to visa to visa, because what you are trying to do is keep your family back home out of poverty. You're trying to build up enough cash at home so that you can eventually return home, but you're constantly in a state, and kept deliberately in a state, of dependency and poverty, effectively, because you're not paid the wages of Swiss workers. You are paid the wages just above the poverty line in your own country. So it's tempting enough to go, but once you're there, you are stuck, and you're stuck on a hamster wheel, going and going and going. And the destruction that reaches then back to the families is something. And I think we have covered this issue before on the dark side, about migrant workers in England, about migrant workers in Greece, was it? Migrant workers.
No, it was actually Portugal.
Portugal, there you go, in Portugal and other places. We've covered this issue where this is a constant struggle. Your own people, you don't pay enough that your own people will do the work, and therefore you are looking to poorer nations, taking advantage of poverty in those nations by inviting them to work, but then restricting the lives of those peoples down to slavery conditions, effectively, because you're never going to allow them their freedom. They're never going to be allowed to have a full human right freedom. And the only reason that Switzerland finally agreed to abolish this law in 2002, that's not so long ago, 2002, is because they wanted the freedom of movement. They wanted to benefit from the freedom of movement policies that the EU has. And because they wanted to do that, they then changed this law. It is a frightening story, and if you read the full article, it's scary to listen to the stories of the children who are left behind and who obviously are traumatized. And there are whole generations. The Swiss people themselves, to their credit, hid children. So there are they call them the forbidden children. There are hidden populations of children that were taken into the Swiss population and basically kept out of the eyes of the government and away from police, and basically lived underground so that they wouldn't be abandoned by their family and they wouldn't go through. But that is still traumatic. You don't have a right to live in the country. You don't have any rights. You're not, you're living in constant fear of deportation, constant fear that you're going to get into trouble, that you'll be arrested. And all of those things have consequences to the psyche of a child who should, one of the primary functions, of course, and what a child needs to grow and survive is safety. If you take that basic function away from a child, you are traumatizing that child immediately. And so here we have a situation where those people are demanding an apology. And when asked if they wanted reparations, they said there is no amount of money you could pay us that will pay us back for losing the years of our lives with our parents, who some of who have now passed on, of course. This was your story, Mr. Storm. Take it away. What do you want to add to it?
Well, I think they're right in saying there's nothing that can be done to pay them back. But I do think, a therapist would probably be a good look for many of them. Yeah. And to put it in context, and I think people need to understand, because in many ways it links to what we were saying previously on the previous story. You had the migrant workers go there, and if they had a child or if they had children, they would cramp themselves into a tiny, tiny studio apartment, because if they had a property that looked large enough for a family, it would arouse the suspicions of the authorities. And at the same time, you have to give credit to parts of the Swiss population, because they set up underground schools for these children so that they could have an education. But at the same time, the trauma is that many of these, the children, they couldn't go outside during the daytime. They had to go outside at night and play. They'd be locked up in the house by their parents so that they wouldn't be discovered. And I think that is extremely traumatic. But some of the things that struck me were that many of these policies are still in place. right? And I don't mean necessarily within Switzerland. I
Mhm.
mean, let's take a look at how the UK treats migrant workers,
There you go. Yep.
right? They want to get migrant workers come in from Eastern Europe because they can pay them less,
Mhm.
but they can't bring their families with them.
Yep.
They're only temporary permits,
Mhm.
right? So the same 6 to 9 months or 9 to 12 months at the most is what they're going to get for their permits. You're not really paying them much.
Yep.
You're probably paying them a little bit better than what they will get in their home countries, but not enough
Right.
to really live. And then when you look at it, so that's on a surface level.
Mm.
But when you look at it now, actually, these policies exist legally in the form of agency workers.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Because what companies are doing now is instead of taking on employees directly, where they'll have to pay for benefits and they
Mhm.
then have to pay in terms of holiday pay and higher
Mhm.
wages, what they do is they say, no, we're going to have agency staff. So now we
Mm.
don't actually have to pay benefits with them.
Mhm.
Sick pay, we don't have to
Mhm.
pay sick pay.
Mhm.
We don't have to do all of these things. And so these policies now exist simply in a different form. And I have for decades said that the agency system is exploitative
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah.
And I think people need to wake up and understand just how exploitative it is. And you can see direct parallels between this story and this system.
Yeah. I have an example. Shall I give you an example?
Okay.
I'm in a number of groups, which shall remain anonymous. One of them highlighted to us the negativity of um, agency work within the Netherlands. And so they brought to our attention a couple of news stories and investigative journalistic pieces that were done for a number of agencies who work with businesses that are across the Dutch border. Because, of course, the Dutch border has the border of Germany, particularly. And so what was happening is that in order to evade detection and to not abide by legal requirements in the Netherlands and not abide by legal requirements in Germany, they would have an agency. So the agency is employing the people. Okay, so the agency brings the staff in. They employ them in the Netherlands, but house them in Germany. So neither country has jurisdiction. And so they're paying them less. They're cramming them into these houses. And what was happening is every time they would do a coordinated raid, of course, they would move the people out and then move them to another address. And so personal stories I've read myself, listened to myself, of literal, like, actual human beings, had my heart absolutely stunned as I read story after story, particularly from women, vulnerable women who were put in abusive situations in which their very safety was at risk because, of course, you're just crammed into a house. The men are forming alliances, behaving how some very unfortunately some men behave, and the women are at the mercy of these situations. So if they don't travel with a partner or a brother or a male companion, they very often find themselves not only being abused by the working conditions, but often back in the housing conditions, they suffer horrific abuse as well. And that's happening in the Netherlands across the border today. There are still government agencies who are still trying to work out how to stamp out this very point of agency work, where they bring in foreign workers who are going to be cheaper. The company then brings them in. And what they're doing to avoid the system is employing them in one country and housing them in another. And because of that
Yeah, but
split in the
listen,
country,
don't tell me they're trying to resolve it because it's easy to resolve. You just pass a legislation that if you employ somebody, they must be housed within that country. Simple.
well, the people like to benefit from working both sides. I think there are a number of
But
things that can
but
be done.
even so, that's still easy to do because make them apply for an exemption from the government,
Yeah.
so that the government will have a record of who you're employing.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I
Right?
also
You
think
want
there
them to
isn't
live
a
in other
need
countries.
So here is something, and I think that people need to understand. Agency work it should be temporary. That's my firm belief. Is you should only have an agency staff for a maximum of 3 months. After that 3 months, if you like the member of staff, you should directly employ them, not through the agency. Therefore, you should have the person should be able to then claim the rights of the pay, holiday, of your country, whatever that is, that standard of living is, it is necessary. But the problem that we have is because people are not able to claim those rights and they're very much subjected to the whims of the agency and the powers of the agency, it's detrimental to the well-being of the staff. And that is partly because people don't want to pay the staff. That's the reality. They don't want to pay the people.
Right, and I agree with you in terms of that's the issue. I will probably push back on that and say, actually, I think 3 months is too short. And the reason I say that is because there is a legitimate need at times for agency workers. So maternity leave, long-term sickness, which are going to be longer than 3 months. Like somebody, depending on the European country, could have maternity leave for a year. I think some might even do 2 years.
2 years, yeah, some are 2 years.
Right. So I think agency work needs to be available, or the ability for it to be longer than 3 months, but it shouldn't be an indefinite process in which you're stuck in. I completely agree with that.
No, but I think if it's a temporary job, that makes sense. But a lot of these are pretending to be temporary jobs when the reality
and they're
is,
not.
and they're not. And you could staff them properly and pay people properly. But because profit is the driving factor, that is why you don't, because actually you're trying to turn a profit, not break even, not cover all your bills. Because remember, there's a difference. Breaking even, you've covered your bills, you've covered your own personal bills for running your business, you've covered the business's bills. Break even. Profit is just the excessive money that you want to make so that you can become rich. That's what profit is. And I think people need to start thinking in those terms, because when we say profit, they're like, well, people need to eat. That's not profit. People ate off of breaking even. That's where they should be eating. Profit is something quite different. And we have become enslaved to the idea that businesses need to turn a profit, when the reality is, because why do you need to be rich? Why again? Tell me what that is. And I'm not saying that profitability is like the worst thing in the world, but I do think we've become enslaved to this idea. And so therefore we will cut any corner possible. And that is generally human to have that. And I think that that's problematic. That's my opinion anyway. But that was Switzerland. Would you like a USA story?
Go for it. Listen, I've got quite a few stories to go through as well.
So let's do a couple extras. Or would you like to pop in with one of your stories? Maybe they can.
No, go for it.
Well, the USA story is the big one, of course, which is that the Democrats control the Senate, basically, which has happened. So they have snuck an extra victory in there, which means that Kamala Harris now has the casting vote for the Senate, hoping that they will get the 51, so that the casting vote will actually give them a little bit of comfort room should a Democrat, will not name those senators that are Democrats in theory only, I don't even know. But they don't control the House. The House is going to be controlled. It's a slim margin, but it's going to be controlled by the Republicans. And this becomes problematic because on the one hand, you now have control in order to push through certain sides of your legislative moves. On the other hand, you are going to be completely and utterly stuck in the water because the Republicans will hold you to ransom. I don't know. There's a lot that could be said about this. There are consequences for... People thought it was going to all go Republican. It didn't, which I guess is the strength of the black vote, because when the numbers came in, it was very clear that the majority of wins were coming from the black population. They were the ones that were turning out, voting in record numbers, and it was 90% votes for Democrats most of the time within the black demographic, whereas in white demographics, that was like a lot lower, shall we put it like that. There are questions about the efficacy or the usefulness of Donald Trump's vote now coming into question, but we've had this question before, and yet still they get into power. The reality is they won the House, and there are question marks as to how some of the most ignorant people you've ever run in your life manage to win seats. This is, I mean, it's quite frightening that y'all vote for these people time and time again, even though they do nothing to benefit the people. In fact, they are the enemy of you living a healthy life, because they want to strip every benefit that you may have from being a productive member of society away from you. So, a number of questions that come up, Mr. Storm.
Well, I said it numerous times and I'll say it again. This is what happens when your hate of others is stronger than your love of self. Right? I think what we're looking at, and I think perhaps this is something, these are the flaws of the US political system, the system of governance in the US. And I think what you're facing now is another government shutdown. Because remember, both houses have to agree on the budget.
Right.
And where you have one house in control by one party and another by another, and what you're finding in the past few decades is that the party that doesn't control the presidency will hold the other to ransom. Right? And so you have government shutdowns where public sector workers don't get paid, but you still got to show up to work. Right? I mean, that is the ludicrous nature of the system there. Yeah, it's a mess. That's all I can say. It's a mess. And I think part of the problem of why they're in such a mess is that they hold the Constitution, they hold their Constitution in such high regard. It's a magical document which there is a modern concept that it cannot be altered or changed. It's a magical document that must remain as it is forever. Well, here's the thing. The drafters of the Constitution saw, or they believed that, hey, it would change every 20 years. Constitutions globally change approximately every 20 years because new challenges come up to society that your constitution cannot address. More than that, there's been what, 24 amendments to the original constitution? So we know that it can be altered and it can be changed, but there is this real modern fallacy, this real modern ideology that it cannot be altered or changed. It's some sacrosanct document. And the reality is that it isn't fit for purpose in a modern democracy. And so you have all these challenges now coming out, especially when you look at elections. You know, the system is still based on the concept of Black people being 3/5 of a human, which is why some states with a very small population have much more representation within the electoral college than they should have.
Right.
And this goes back to the fact that it's not fit for purpose.
Right.
So this concept that you have democracy and it's one person, one vote. Well, no, that's not true. It's not one person, one vote. Depending on which state you live in, your vote counts differently.
Yeah. I mean, you know, one of the things that always strikes me in the conversation is I don't know of any other government in which they just shut down and not work. I think it's quite staggering, having lived in a number of European countries, to think of a government actually having the ability to just go, we don't agree on something, so we are not coming to work to pay you to do anything. We're going on to me, that's such a staggering thought. So that's one thing. And the other thing that I find quite staggering is in a lot of countries within the European context, I can't speak to other countries, of course, but within the European context, we have multi-party systems in which you have to work cross-party. You have to figure it out whether you like your opposition or not. You have to figure out how to find a line and go with it. You can't just, we didn't get this, so we're not doing it, and that's the end of that. We're not getting our way, so bam, we're not doing anything. You have to have concessions, and whether I think that's brilliant or not, the fact that the US system actually grinds to a halt and is held hostage by this kind of behavior is shocking. It really is quite shocking, because you don't pay your staff. You're not what do you mean you're not paying the people who work in your hospitals, your cleaners? And we have had periods where that's happened in other countries, not to say it hasn't, but we are at a place where most countries, you go to work and you get paid. The government has to go to work. If there is a reason for any kind of stalemate, it gets kicked up to a bipartisan place in which it gets dealt with and sent back and told to work it out. And you have to work it out, whether we like the conclusion or not. You had to work these things out. So I think it's quite interesting. I mean, the Netherlands is a place where you don't have a majority. They always have a government which is negotiated between the parties, and this party will get these seats and that party will get these offices and you'll get these, and they have to negotiate. That's what they have to do. So the idea that you only have two parties and you can't negotiate and work it out between the two of you, something wrong, something deeply, deeply wrong in the system.
Yeah,
and you have the nerve to go around and tell other people about democracy. I mean, really, you got no business telling anybody about democracy. None.
And it once again comes back to your hate of others is greater than your love of self, because you still will go out and vote for these people that shut the government down. And the reality is, you're not getting paid because the government shut down if you're a public sector worker. But you still got to pay your rent. You still got to pay your mortgage. You still got to pay your utility bills. You still, if you have children, got to feed them, clothe them, all of these other things. And yet you will still go and vote for the same clowns. It makes no sense to me, because their actions show that actually they don't have your best interest at heart.
No, but you're right. The hate of others, I think it's a good point. Which brings us nicely to the UK. I have two stories out of the UK. One is Remembrance Sunday. And the Flower Morning. That whole and the other one is the fact that taxes are set to increase. So Mr. Hunt, Jeremy Hunt, has gone on TV. He's been on the BBC, and he said,
"Oh, you called him by his real name."
He has said explicitly, taxes are going up. Brace yourself, people. So spending cuts are in, and taxes are going up. Recession is being bandied about. And I can't help but wonder, the whole of Europe is suffering under increased inflation, increased prices everywhere. This is not exclusive to the UK. This is a problem across Europe. But I have to be honest and say, I find it really difficult to look at the UK when I look around Europe and see how they're handling it comparatively and say, is Brexit to blame for your predicament? You're really having a very difficult time. Is that because you decided to cut off your nose to spite your face? Is it because you decided that the hate of others was more important than working together? Because, in places where we're working together, it's not easy. Prices are still increasing. There is still some talk of recession, but we certainly aren't having the conversations you're having and the desperation that's happening in your country. Like, what did y'all vote for again? What was that? What was that vote about the independent? And yes, we can talk about the worldwide issues, and there are worldwide issues, but there is a direct comparison between what's happening in the UK and what's happening in Europe, and you can see stark differences on how the people, the everyday person, is being impacted by the things in the UK versus how it's being done in Europe. And I think you had to ask yourself, did you make your situation worse with your hatred for other people and your policies that are anti-human? Like, is that what you did? Just saying. And then the other one, of course, is Remembrance Sunday. They've just had Remembrance Sunday, and at 11 o'clock they have 11 minutes worth of silence. And the king was leading out for the first time. And you have to ask the question about cognitive dissonance. You are commemorating winning a war in Europe, which enabled you to be a founding member of the European Union, to sign treaties at Maastricht, to free people from ideologies that were racist, etc., to then cuss out an Irishman for not wearing a poppy, and to then say we don't want those Europeans here. What are you doing? How are you making this work in your brain? Like, literally, how are you doing this? This is some real, when you want a definition of cognitive dissonance, maybe just look to the UK, because I can't think of a better, you can't think of a better display than that. Talking about our allies and how we were together and blah, 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 blah. And then we don't want nothing to do with you. Stop coming to our country. What? What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Right. So I think what we're facing with the poppies and the poppy fascists is performative nationalism, performative patriotism, right?
What he said.
Because it's not representative of the ideologies that you proclaim to hold as a nation or to have fought in various wars for, right? And what is not being listened to is that the British Army committed atrocities in various countries. And people are going to naturally not want to honor those soldiers. And hear what?
Okay.
That's exactly a right that those soldiers allegedly fought and died for. So this performative patriotism, which says if you don't wear a poppy, you're not a patriot, right? Is to say, look, these soldiers didn't really fight and die for you to have this freedom of choice, this freedom of expression, right? And so I think actually the real dishonor comes in where you try to shame and force people to hold that idea and believe, and I must wear this symbol. Right? And I think the other thing to bear in mind is that there's a fair amount of soldiers, or sorry, veterans, who actually themselves don't wear it. And what I've heard some of them say is that part of the reason that they don't wear it is because the British Legion, which runs the campaigns, has been taken over by a whole bunch of racist right-wing ideologues. And they don't want to be associated with that. So even the veterans, some veterans themselves, to come out and saying, look, I fought in wars. I was in Afghanistan. I was here. I was there. And I cannot support these campaigns because they are not representative of what I believed I was going to fight for. Now, I'm not going to get sidetracked because they will go and say, actually, once you're in the war, you realize, hold up, this isn't what I signed up for.
Yeah.
Right. But it's the idea of what they believed they were initially going to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, look, yeah, I don't wear poppies. I won't wear poppies. because of the atrocities that the British Army committed. And I understand some people might be offended by that
Mhm.
and they might feel away. But guess what? There are also people that will be offended and might feel away if I did wear one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's a nuanced argument to be had
Mm. Mm.
here.
Mhm.
And I am not going to dismiss either side's position. I don't
Mm.
think it's a simple
It's not a black and
uh,
white issue, as they say.
yeah, you
It's
know,
many
I don't
shades of
think
grey.
it's that, right?
Yeah.
But when we're talking about Jeremy, what was his name again?
Hunt.
Oh,
Hunt.
sorry. I just,
Hunt.
sometimes the pronunciation gets messed up in my
Yeah.
mind.
Your namesake, huh?
Um, well, I get the first name right. It's always the surname I struggle with. Um, Here's the thing. It doesn't have to be tax increases and budget cuts. This is an ideological position that they are taking as Tories. And what you have to understand is that when you're talking about budget cuts, you're talking about not paying NHS staff. But hey, our heroes that helped keep us going through the pandemic.
That bit
What
right
you're
there.
talking about is not paying your teachers. Well, hey, our teachers do such a great job at educating our children,
That bit right there.
right? But what you're never talking about is actually increasing MPs' pay. Because
That
guess
bit
what?
right there. They
They
got a
get
pay
to
rise.
decide whether they get a pay rise or not. And you know what? Inevitably, they get a pay rise. And so it's a bit rich to be telling people, hey, we got to make cuts here. And on top of that, I think if you're going to raise taxes, there's no need for austerity, right? Because essentially what you're saying is we're going to raise more money to get us out of the hole, right? But now, in order to get us out of the hole quicker, we're just going to starve a few million people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's no need to do both at the same time. You can raise taxes, and there's debate over whether actually there's actually a hole in the government budget or not.
There is many a debate. I
Right?
found that quite interesting. I thought
Right.
that after Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, there was a hole. Apparently, there is some debate as to whether now that they've reversed all of the policies, whether there's even a hole in it. I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
So there's a whole debate. But what shouldn't be debatable is, hey, we don't need to do both of these things at the same time. And it's not imperative for the government to do both of these things at the same time. Because the reality is, people are still going to lend money to the UK. Right? It's not like the average household who's faced with debt and says, look, if I don't get out of this, I'm not going to get any financial help. Nobody's going to lend me money or anything like that. It's not run like the average household where you have to then say, I need to increase income and tighten my belt.
Yeah.
You can increase the income as a government, and it might take you a bit longer to climb out of that debt, but people are still going to lend you money.
It's still going to happen.
Right?
Shocking enough.
But what this is going to do, once again, and I've said it before, is that it allows the Tories to make cuts to the NHS, which opens it for privatization.
Yep.
Right? What it's going to do is allow the Tories to make cuts to education spending, and you're going to see more private schools. Right? And this is the process that it's going to go down. They're going to gradually cut. And public services are death by 1,000 cuts. That's essentially what the Tories are aiming for.
Yeah.
And on top of that, increasing taxes whilst saying we have to make cuts to budget spending. In a time of economic crisis, it's only going to hurt one demographic more than most. And it's going to be those that are poorer off.
Mm-hmm. And that will inevitably hurt those who are from diverse ethnic backgrounds. Because oftentimes, statistically, because of the country's systems, racism, etc., they fall heavily into those categories due to historical reasons. So you're going to hurt the same demographic over and over again.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Before these tax cuts were announced, we're talking about months ago, schools were already talking about having to make choices between heating and redundancies. If you are going to be cutting their budgets further, just how much do you think you're actually going to damage the education system?
Mm-hmm. Already stretch education. Well, I know that, was it the UN that stepped in recent weeks and said that if they continue with austerity, they will be driving up poverty to escalating levels within the UK, and they recommended to the government to stop the austerity. There was no need. Wasn't it the UN that stepped in and said that recently?
Yeah, but UN's always said them stuff. They don't listen.
Listen. I do sometimes wonder what the purpose of the UN is. Well, the UN is constantly ignored. But anyway, nevertheless, we have the UN. But I think these are important points. You know, recently we had, what was it that came to me as you were talking? Something about the UK that came to me. Never mind, maybe it'll come back. But I think it's important to reckon with the devastating effects of what you're doing. That's what it was. Agency work. So this is a tie over from another point. Agency work in the NHS is costing the NHS something like 15 billion or something ridiculous. Horrifyingly, that they are not paying their actual staff. They're paying agency staff. People are leaving employment to go work in the agency because although they lose all their benefits, they get paid more. And so that works out better. And I'm like, yo, people, it seems really obvious to say, but that is a methodology of privatization. You literally are privatizing your staff by driving the workforce out of employment and into the arms of the agents, and then thereby forcing the hand of the hospital to actually pay the staff again. So they get it. It's a circular system. Pay your staff well enough in the first place. You will always need some agency workers. Yes, covering for maternity leave. There will always be people who want to work a little bit more flexibly or what have you, or they're at retirement age and they just want to pick up some extra shifts, etc. Yes, all of that. But that should not be the bulk of your staff. And just listening to that whole story, I was like, death by 1,000 cuts, NHS, death by 1,000 cuts.
Yep.
So, yeah. All right, share with us your stories. Your turn.
Okay. So we've spoken quite a bit, actually. And a lot of my stories are in some ways connected, but they have come back to one central thing, which we really must do one day, which is my real disagreement with the concept and idea of nations.
The dark side of nations.
And as I go through this, we'll start to see common trends, I think.
Okay.
COP27.
Yes.
We now have COP27 going on in Egypt, in which the world gets together and they say, hey, we need to do something about climate change. And you have all these countries making commitments. You have all these European ex-colonial powers in the US telling all these African nations and Asian nations, hey, stop your pollution. Stop your pollution. Well, it's a bit rich for a number of reasons. Number one, Germany just dismantled part of a wind farm in order to expand a coal mine. Right? Number two, the USA, one of the world's greatest polluters, pulled out of not just the Kyoto Accords, but the Paris Accords as well. Sorry, it was a Kyoto Protocol, I believe, in the Paris Accords. Right? So two of the commitments that they said, hey, we're going to stop polluting. They just said, hey, no, we changed our mind on this. Right? And the Kyoto was done under Bush and the Paris Accords were done under Trump.
Mm.
Two Republican presidents, might I just point out. Right? On top of this, you have the fact that these European nations and the US have for decades benefited from fossil fuels, built their economies on the backs of fossil fuels, right? And then it's now saying to African nations, hey, you need to stop burning fossil fuels. No, you can't build up your economies in the way that we did. But here's the real hypocrisy of it all. Why the hell are you still shipping fossil fuels from African nations then? You're telling the African nations they can't establish industries that will benefit themselves off of fossil fuels, which are discovered in their own borders. But you are happy to exploit them for those fossil fuels and then ship them to your country to be used to build up your own economies. And so for me, that makes a real mockery of the of COP27, because when you look at the actions, that there is no real nation there that is going to commit to procedures and policies that will actually bring about real change. Right? So I have real issues with COP27, and Greta Thunberg said she wasn't going. And I can understand why. You know, it's a real form of greenwashing. That, yeah, I just can't get with.
Can we just give props to Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, leading the charge against these nations? Can we just do that for a second? So I
Yeah,
know,
she
I
called them
know, but
out at COP26.
she is a champion of the rights of particularly the islands, of course, but of poorer nations, and is really leading the charge for holding, Western nations to account. Y'all have to stop first. Y'all have to be the first to stop. You can't be looking back here because this ain't gonna work. Y'all need to stop because what you do is directly impacting the rest of us. And if you don't stop, then this mess that we're dealing with, this is not right.
I think
Come on.
one of the things is, especially when you live in a Western nation, you get this real Western bias in your media reporting. Like China is a polluter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you're not, as I said, no. Where's it put in the media that Germany just dismantled part of a wind farm to expand a coal mine? And the other thing is that China is actually at the cutting edge of renewable technologies.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, they might be burning a lot of fossil fuels, but actually they're investing a lot more into developing green technology than a lot of the Western nations are.
And
So
again, it goes to how you're counting burning fossil fuels, because per capita they burn less, as I understand it, than the Western nations. Per capita, the Western nations burn more. And so although they burn more because there are more of them, does not mean that they are the worst polluters in that way that we're counting. Like it.
But I think the difference is that the fact that they're investing so heavily in these technologies shows foresight. It shows actually they have a real desire to move to a point where they are no longer reliant on fossil fuels. And if Western nations were truly at that position, they will be pouring resources and a lot more into developing greener technologies. And as I said, I've already spoken about the fact that there's wind farms up off the coast of Scotland which generate enough electricity or so much electricity that they cannot contain it all. So they shut down the wind
Can't.
farms instead of investing in the infrastructure to contain and store more of the electricity. They
Mm-hmm.
say, "Oh, we'll shut it down," and they're not making that investment. So for me, I think that's part of the problem, and it links to another story that I want to speak on, and that is the Just Stop Oil protesters in the UK. So there's a protest group called Just Stop Oil. And this week, some protesters climbed up on the gantries that go over the M25. And for those that don't know what that is, it's a major motorway that encircles London. So you can go round London and come off at various points to get to different areas of London and the surrounding areas. And it's a major, major motorway. So they had to shut that down. And when the M25 gets shut down, that causes problems everywhere.
You can't shut
Absolutely
down one part of the
everywhere.
M25 where it does not shut down pretty much the whole of the M25, much less London itself. Like, it is a nightmare when it shuts down.
Right. But it's not just London. It's the fact that you have like the M40 and the M4 heading up north. You know, there's major
Yeah, loads
motorways that
of major motorways actually
yeah,
start on the M25. They go through the M25 or start on the M25, etc. Yeah.
right. So it has impact throughout a large part of the UK. So anyway, they shut that down. Now, one of the things that's really irritated me is that everyone has been demonizing Just Stop Oil. And they're saying that, hey, these people are causing problems. You know, people can't get to work. There's an economic crisis. They're making things harder for people. They're, you know, the NHS and ambulance and all of this. Well, first of all, we just spoke about how you don't want to pay your NHS staff properly. So let's not pretend like you're interested in the well-being of NHS patients or anyone else, right? Let's just put that to the side. But one of the things that is not being put about in the media is the actual demands of this Just Stop Oil protest. And the demands of the Just Stop Oil protests, and the reason I'm bringing it up now is because they link to this story, to the previous story, is that the demands are actually very reasonable. Because I remember speaking to you about it earlier this week, and you didn't know what it was. And what the demands of this group are, is that the government stop giving new permits to drill for oil and other fossil fuels within the UK. That's not unreasonable,
No,
especially if you
take that money and put that into take that energy, same energy, and put that into renewable sources.
right into renewable sources. But also, when you look at the fact you've got COP27 going on, you've got, you know, the UK government saying we're committed to green energy. You've got the war in Ukraine and they're saying we don't want to rely on Russian oil and gas. Well, actually, if that was true, then why would you not listen to what this group are saying and then say, well, actually, you're right. We shouldn't be reliant on Russian oil and gas. We want to move to green energy. So let's not give out any new licenses to drill. And the other thing is that the UK government has handed out so many licenses already that aren't actually being used. So it's not like if you said we're not going to give new licenses from the 1st of January 2023, that all oil discovery or natural gas discovery just automatically stops.
Yeah, no.
Because you've got that buffer window built in of the licenses that you've already permitted. Right? So it means that the actual demands of this group are not unreasonable. But yet nobody is listening to them. And more worryingly, nobody in mainstream media is actually talking about the real demands that the group are making. Right?
I didn't know.
And I think for me, that is real worrying because it means, or what it does is it highlights an agenda within the media where perspectives are being edited out.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And you have to understand, with all the media outlets out there, that they're not being carried, and the real aims aren't being carried. This is an intentional effort to edit. Right. And so this then brings me into the next thing I want to talk about. Sorry, let me have you you give your response, because the story's
No, go to the next thing. I'm good. I think you've covered it.
Which is, during this protest, the Just Stop Oil protest, there were police arresting journalists.
Journalists?
Yeah.
What are they arresting the journalists for?
There were at least 3 arrested at this protest.
Yeah, but why?
Because in last week's show, I told you that the UK had certain hallmarks of fascism.
Yes. Are they put that legislation into play already?
Huh?
Is that legislation into play already?
No, but the police already, this is what I'm saying, the police already showing the hallmarks of fascist powers.
Wow.
Right? Where you shut down reporting, journalism, a free press. Right? Because one of the signs of fascism is that you no longer have a free press. So what happened was, one of the journalists they arrested, she was a journalist for LBC.
Okay.
And they come up to her and they say to her, in fact, she wasn't at the gantry. She was on a footbridge that went over the motorway. So she's not even at the protest per se. She's reporting on the protest from a safe place. And the police come up and they arrest her, and they say to her, she says, "But I'm a journalist, I'm covering the story. Would you like to see my press card?"
Yeah.
So she shows them the press card and they arrest her.
Excuse me, what now?
So she spends 5 hours in a jail cell.
Who what?
And there were 2 other reporters there from another organization. They spent 13 hours, I think it was, in a jail cell.
Who what?
Right? Now, here the real funny thing is, on the press card that people in the UK carry, it says, "This person is a certified member of the press. If you want to verify this, you can call," and then they have like the police chief's number. So they could have pulled out their phones on the spot and verified that this person was a bona fide journalist.
But what was the arrest charge? What were you doing? Like, I don't
They let her
understand.
go 5 hours later.
So, but what? Suspicion of what?
Exactly.
Suspicion of what?
Exactly. Right?
I don't understand. What are you being arrested for?
Reporting on the story. And what happened was, the arresting police force was Hertfordshire Police. Now, Hertfordshire Police came out and defended the police officers' actions, right? And then had to backtrack, I think it was the next day or the day after, because, of course, all the press came after them for this. Because here's the thing, if you're arresting one of them, well, who's next? It was called out in the Houses of Parliament. One of the MPs raised it. And so there was a whole furor over it. But the reality is, once again, the police came out and just defended their actions until it became politically embarrassing enough that they had to say, well, actually, no, they were hasty in their actions. Well, we all know they're hasty, but this is the tip of the iceberg. Because whilst I was reading about this and listening to interviews about this, this has actually been a very common trend at protests, where the police are actually arresting journalists so that the real story is not reported on.
Yeah, there is no recordings of it. Yeah, we saw that throughout the Black Lives Matter protests, that it was actually the journalists that were the first to get arrested and scooped up followed by medics, and so on and so forth. And then obviously it goes through, because then you don't have the protests, you don't have the coverage, you don't have the people on the ground to help, and then you leave a rogue element who are going to do what the rogue element does, and you persecute those who are there peacefully protesting. And you saw it time and time again all through the
Yep.
last 2 years of the Black Lives Matter protests. It's been the same thing, same principles that were used.
So, yes, fascist Britain. So those three stories were connected. And then, since we're dealing with journalism and freedom of speech and all the rest of this, I have to touch on Twitter.
I had that, but I decided I figured you would have it, so let it go.
No. Here's the thing. I'm pretty sure we're going to come at it from different positions, actually.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure that. So I'd like to hear your position.
No. You brought it up. You go first. Go first.
Well, actually, I was just going to comment on, yes, you have the Elon Musk and Twitter thing, but one of the perhaps less known positions on this is actually just how closely the government of Nigeria is watching the takeover of Twitter. Because back in January, Twitter and the Nigerian government came to an agreement, because Twitter had been banned for 7 months because the Nigerian government had accused it of supporting and coming out on the side of separatists.
Okay.
So they banned it for 7 months. And then in January, they came to an agreement. Twitter came to an agreement where they would register in Nigeria and pay the local taxes in Nigeria. So, of course, now they're watching Twitter with a keen interest to see what's going to happen now that Musk has taken over. Wow. Because now that it's a private company, are they going to be trying to rip up agreements? Are they going to revert back to their previous position of support? So actually, it's quite interesting what's going to happen, because what they're saying is, we don't want any social media companies able to destabilize our nation, which is a legitimate fear given the fact of the impact that Facebook and other social media platforms had in the US elections and the UK elections. So I think it's very interesting. And the fact that Nigeria actually banned Twitter. And they're watching it because they're happy to do so again.
Yeah.
Right. But it actually brings about the question of, if it's known at a national and international level, at a governmental level, how destabilizing these things are when it comes to elections. I understand the concept of free speech, but also I value the integrity of democracy. At which point do you say, during our electoral process, do we actually suspend social media platforms to guarantee the integrity of our democracies? And so it's a very interesting position that Nigeria is taking in terms of banning Twitter and social media platforms in order to make sure that their nation stays stable. And also, I think it's important to understand, when you look at actually the reports that have been written on social media campaigns, and that actually the destabilizing factors are actually done intentionally at governmental levels. So governments will target another country in order to destabilize it. I actually think that Nigeria's stance is actually very prudent, because you would not tolerate a government attacking you. Say it was a cyber attack, it would be considered an act of war, an act of aggression. But somehow it's acceptable for a government to target your nation and destabilize it politically, and that's not considered an act of war or aggression.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I did not know about that. So that's it's always interesting and enlightening. No, you're right. We were coming at it from slightly different angles, but actually I think they tie in slightly. So the angle that I came at the Twitter story from was, if Twitter has now become a sole proprietor, so there's one owner, and that one owner has set a standard which is racist, which is misogynistic, which is bullying, etc., 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 and is going to revert the company back to bad practice. And we have seen that with the blue check stuff. We've seen that with the rise of the N-word on Twitter. You know, Musk took over, and it's like every troll, racist person came out of the woodwork. The question that I had to the global majority, which are Black and brown people across the globe, is are we going to just shut down Twitter? Are we just going to say, you know what, it's time we all turn our backs? Which I think is interesting that a country's already taken such an action. But I think it's for previous Twitter, but it's quite interesting facing new Twitter, so to speak, or the new kind of takeover position of Musk, and how he's lauding his free speech and his ability to do what he wants to do in the face of whatever. And he's had to obviously learn the hard way and had to take down accounts for fake accounts from Mark Zuckerberg and Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Bush and so on and so forth. They've had to pull down as many accounts as they could, as quickly as they could, of these fake blue check accounts. So I think that I have a question mark. If, regardless of how good Twitter may have been, you know, we talk about Black Twitter and people talk about queer Twitter and book Twitter and any other kind of Twitter that for any other marginalized group, is it not prudent for those marginalized groups who are world majorities, you are world majority, to turn around in a world majority and say, let's shut this thing down. This is obviously inappropriate. Let's everyone countrywide suspend their accounts across the globe. And then, you know, if you trolls and racists want to sit on there, go ahead. But you are a minority, and may your minority stay there. And could we actually pull that together is my question, and do something like that. And I think it's necessary. Whether we'll actually do it, I don't know. But I think it's necessary to put a point to be made that that kind of behavior is not, I don't care who you are, there's consequences to your actions.
I think there is actually space and room to do it, and I think there's a platform that exists already for it. The problem is, I don't like who it is that's run by, and I find it to be very predatory. And that is actually Weibo.
Yeah.
Right? When you consider actually the consumer market that already exists, and when you consider the investment that the Chinese government has already made into African nations, there is already the room and space there. The platform will be there, the infrastructure for it will be there. You know, say Nigeria banned Twitter again, well, actually, Weibo will be the next platform to turn to in terms of actually if you wanted to do that. But as I said, I have real concerns regarding that, and actually the freedom that people would then have on the platform.
Yeah.
Because as I said, I think Twitter, when it was in public ownership, had to walk a fine line between freedom of speech and you know, government or oversight. Not necessarily governmental oversight, but oversight of the platform. So I think it is possible, but I believe Jack Dorsey is coming out with his own thing. I think he's beta testing a new platform.
Yeah, there's some. But I did some research for, I think, a former episode of this, which we never got to Twitter, where there are a couple of platforms that are beta testing or are in the woodworks. But again, question marks about the ethical nature of those countries, those companies, etc., and the kind of ideologies, and actual questions about the process by which they work, because they work on a slightly different process to Twitter. And so they have this idea of localized servers and them being run, and that actually has led to bigger problems in some of these systems because of oversight, and then, you know, bullying and what have you, and all of that predatory nature occurs. But I do think a message does need to be sent to the world minority cultures. You don't get to dictate and behave in ways that are continue to behave in ways that are disruptive without there being consequences. And this is an easy win, I think, for world majority cultures. I think this is just it's a no-brainer for me. Just let's all just plug out. You know, Instagram's still there, TikTok's still there.
Listen, I said
There's many other ways of communicating. You don't actually need Twitter. I mean, I get that people love it, but we don't need it. So you can literally just plug out.
I love Twitter.
You did it overnight, but you've plugged out.
Well, I got kicked off of Twitter, right? Let's be real. No, I didn't plug out. I got kicked off of Twitter. And the moment they asked me for my phone number, it was like, screw you. I don't need you. You know, I'm like, no, ain't that deep.
Survive without Twitter. You survive.
If I have to provide you with my government details, I don't need you. So yeah. Look, I think I find Elon Musk to be right wing. Extreme right wing.
Okay.
Right. And I can only see Twitter becoming a hellhole for minorities.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean people of color.
No.
I mean whatever minority you belong to.
Yeah.
And in fact, you can belong to the co-majority, and it's going to be a hellhole for you. And by co-majority, I mean you can be a woman, and it's going to be hell for you on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Because they don't have the systems in place anymore. I mean, he's
but here's the thing. I actually don't blame Musk, because I mean, when your dad is banging your stepsister, there ain't nothing righteous gonna come out of that family.
Well, he's old colonial money, huh? So
he's old. Look,
he's old colonial money. So there are going to be some problems there. Let's be honest.
Listen,
and the kind of myth that surrounds how he's entrepreneurial and he's brought himself up, and I'm like, that's actually a myth. Huh? It's like, people, please, can we get some realism on this guy? He is old money. He is old colonial money, and on top of that, he's actually just taken pre-existing businesses and turned a profit. That's really what he's doing.
Listen, he's old colonial money. You can be old colonial money and still be all right in the head.
No.
Right? No, listen.
How many of those people? No. I have questions. Old colonial money, there's always problems, because colonial mindsets, right? Old colonial money comes with colonial mindsets, and those mindsets are dodgy. Those mindsets lead to abusive situations. They don't normally lead to you sleeping with just stepdaughter, half sister.
Right. Okay. Now here's the thing. But that's the whole point. I'm like, of people that come from old money that have sometimes said, look, you know what, this is right. I know where it comes from. I'm renouncing this. There was the heiress we were talking about the other day that was like, you know what? No, I ain't
keeping rid of 90% of her. Oh, there's another one that's recently come out and said she's given away 90% of her wealth. She's decided.
I think that's the one that I spoke about the other week. But the point is, you can come from old money and still be all right in the head.
Yeah, these people.
But if your dad is sleeping with your stepsister, as I said,
there are some challenges there.
I'm not quite sure therapy is going to help you. Okay, that's just the reality of it.
Challenges there. There are some challenges there.
All right.
That's in the vein of, what's his name? What's that really creepy um creepy
Donald Trump?
yeah, well, him, but the creepy he married his adopted daughter.
Oh, Woody Allen.
Oh, that's in that vein. That's oh,
Yeah.
that's wrong on all kinds of levels. That's grooming at a level that just oof,
Yeah.
that's
So,
scary.
right. Yeah. I'm just looking at the time. There's just two stories I want to push on through quickly.
Mhm.
Right. So, the Iranian refugee who inspired the movie The Terminal, he died this week.
Yes, I
Right.
saw that.
And when you look at his story,
Mm,
it is troubling.
mhm,
It is another reason why I don't believe in nations,
mhm, mhm,
right? But I think the sad thing is that he was so messed up from what he went through
mm,
that even after he was granted political asylum,
mm.
he still lived in the airport for years
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah.
But so troubling and disturbed was he that a few weeks ago he moved back to the airport. And they report that when they discovered his body, he was in possession of a couple of €1,000. So he had money,
He had
but
enough.
this is
Yeah.
how greatly he was
Mm,
affected.
mm,
And it makes me think because your heart goes out to this man who was sleeping at an airport. But what of the millions globally that are in refugee camps?
oh, speak on that. Mm-mm.
And I'm like, if he was this disturbed
Mhm, mhm,
and affected by living in an airport,
mhm, mhm,
how much more so are you going to be
mm,
affected living in a refugee camp,
mhm, mhm, mhm. Mm,
right? In the airport, you have relative security.
right,
There's police, there's security cameras, there's
right.
all of this going around. But as a woman or a young girl in a refugee camp, you can be raped and there's nobody really to report it to,
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
right? Um, if you're disabled or something, your belongings, your few belongings can be stolen,
mhm, mhm,
right? You are at risk of being trafficked by people traffickers,
mhm,
all sorts of these things.
mhm,
And so it just makes me think, when we look at this story and people who watch the terminal talk about being moved by this man's plight,
mm,
but are different to the plight of millions more around the world
mhm,
that are in a worse position.
mm,
And in fact, they will be the ones that will be like, we don't want those refugees here.
mhm, mhm,
And I just find it disheartening that a movie about a real life can move you, but a real life can't,
mm, mm.
right? And so, before I move on, because it connects to the next story, is there anything you want to say?
No, I think you've raised a really valuable point about the value that we have for life, and some would say it's inevitable that we identify with people who are like us, but I think that's too easy. I think it is too easy. We live in a world in which we have access to so much information, stories, so much connectivity, and we are choosing to turn a blind eye to
You
the
know,
plights of millions
I have never met a person in the world that does not look like me.
because we're all human.
I mean, the people that I see and that I would say don't look like me are ones that actually you look at and you're like, there's been a tragedy, something's gone wrong.
Mm,
And so you deserve empathy.
mm,
because everybody in the world looks like me,
Mm.
barring that tragedy. Because everybody has two eyes, everybody has two arms, everybody has two legs.
Mm.
Okay, some might be lacking a brain, but that's why you deserve empathy, right? And
That's why
so,
he gets me into trouble, folks. Huh? This is why I get into trouble.
why do you get into trouble?
Lacking a brain. What's wrong with you? Be nice.
That was the nicest way I could have put it.
I know that was the nicest way you could have put it. That's
Well,
what's
then you
trouble.
can't tell me you can't tell me to be nice, because I'm being nice then,
Step up. Come on,
right?
step up into your Christianity. Do it.
I am. Listen, even Jesus said you den of vipers.
All right, let's just get to the point. Come on,
Right.
come on.
Okay.
I know we're getting tired. I'm getting
Right.
tired. Let's go.
Right. All right. So, yeah, everybody in the world.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do get that, and I think, but still, people do identify with stories that touch close to home. You know, given it, like you use the example of disability. You know, people often don't think about disabilities until it comes close to home. People don't think about mental health issues until it comes close to home. I don't think about cancer until it's knocking on my door. I don't think about Down syndrome until it's in my family. I don't think about, and I think with refugees, there's a real lack of thinking about it. Well, it's not happening to me, is it? It's not happening to my neighbors. And again, the propaganda machine is constantly feeding you a narrative, and unless you actually are deliberately taking a course of action that puts you outside of that narrative, you are always hearing those people are your problem. The problem that you have is to be blamed on those people, whoever those people might be. And so the fact that you can see someone, you know, living in squalor, living in camps that are broken down, that are raided, that have the troubling health conditions that go with those camps, that lack safety for people, and be like, next.
Right. Now, I want to push back on that idea because it also leads into my next story. I want to push back on the idea that you don't really think about things until they affect you directly.
Okay.
Because Ukraine is the greatest example of that. The UK was not the UK was not impacted. The UK was not impacted by the Ukraine war. How many families in the UK were impacted by the Ukraine war? And yet how many took in Ukrainian refugees saying, well, they look like us?
Again, there was two things. I'll push back with you. Two things. One is there was a concerted effort. How many wars are going on at the moment? How many people? If we look at one of the longest running wars, Yemeni, and you look at the people there who are starving, the children that are going hungry, the millions that have died in that war. Look at how those people are treated, and nothing moves. You know, let me not say nothing. There are people that are moved, and there is work that is happening, but still, this thing continues to rage. But what do we have 24/7 coverage of? 24/7 coverage. And how did that coverage begin? Oh my gosh, they have blonde hair and blue eyes like us. Oh my gosh, these are our people. Oh my gosh. And if you have that continuous message that your people are suffering, yeah, and it's been on 24/7 that your people are suffering, yeah, that you're proving the point which people resonate with, the things that seemingly are like them. If it reflects them, they see it. And if they
I'm saying to you, they are not impacted by it. They are not impacted by it.
But it does look like
it's not that something has to directly impact them.
No, but I gave two caveats. I did say in the first place, it has to, you either look like it, or it reflects you in some way, or you've been through it. Those are the two things that people are moved by. Things that they have experienced.
I'm saying to you
that look like
that
them.
I'm saying to you that this is solely on the fact that they look like them.
Yes, absolutely. Well, absolutely. Right? And now that is, of course, impacting them.
Right.
But, and here is where the but comes in. Because it's only based on the fact that it looks like them and there is no real empathy there, what are we having at the moment? There is a real backlash across.
I told you this was coming.
There's
But
a real backlash across
this is
countries
coming.
against Ukrainians who have
Yeah.
come for refugees. Why? Because you don't actually have real empathy for the problems. People are actually, you know, we covered news stories where people were vexed, where people were complaining. These people are ungrateful. I've put them in my house and they won't sit and eat with me and they won't do. Like, they're not toys. They're not playthings. They're humans. They've been through trauma. Leave the people them alone. They just want a safe space to hide, to deal with their trauma. If they deal with you in a way that is, you know, but you expecting this attitude of gratitude, like they must bow at your feet, you know, desperate for your love and affection so that you can feel better about yourself, is utter nonsense. Why? Because you don't actually have empathy. You're not actually seeing the human. You're doing something based on a false ideology, a false god. Yeah?
Right.
Anyway, that's just my little 2 pence that I drop in there.
So yeah, as I said, I mean, the concept that these people look like them is, once again, it's not that these people look like them. It's that they're white like me.
Oh yeah.
Right. No, well, I need to make that distinguishment because, as I said, I have yet to meet someone that doesn't look like me.
And that's not to say, hey, this is, and you know, before anyone comes off this podcast saying, oh, you know, these people are anti-Ukrainian. No. Don't go there. Don't go there. Because we work behind the scenes and do what we have to do to help people. Why? Because they are in need. And it is none of your business how we're helping. We're not doing that for your praise, your credit, or nothing. They deserve the help because they are in need. And just because y'all are not helping the Yemeni people doesn't mean that you shouldn't help the Ukrainians. And so don't get it twisted on my channel, please. Don't come up in my comment section with none of that mess, because I got to have to tell you about yourself, huh? Not today.
So anyway, this brings me on to my next story, which I want to touch on.
Is this your last story?
Last story. I promise. There's more, but this will be my last one. So, and that's the Channel small boat crossings.
Oh, I heard that today. I said that to you. There's been how many thousand?
Yeah. Well, in 2022 so far, there's been 40,000.
40,000. That's what it is. Yeah.
Right. And it's real funny that. What's that?
Isn't that record breaking? That's the most they've ever had, huh? Yeah.
Yep. So it's real funny that the British take back control of their borders in order to control immigration, and actually the people crossing the channel is actually at record numbers. So in 2021, there were 28,526, and in 2020 there were 8,404. Yeah.
So you can see a direct line of when you left the EU, huh?
Right. Okay.
Direct line, direct consequences, but y'all ain't listening. Y'all ain't listening.
Now, I'm saying this on the back of a Tory minister getting up in the Houses of Parliament this week, and I've said this before, but he explicitly said that he wanted to get rid of the Human Rights Act to deal with immigrants. Right? He's like, well, if we get rid of the Human Rights Act, then we can just get rid of the immigrants when they come and the asylum seekers when they come. It makes it easier for us to just send them back. So last year, 75% of the arrivals by small boats into the UK across the English Channel were men between the ages of 18 and 39. Okay. And 30% of the arrivals were coming from Iran. That was the largest demographic in that method coming across. Now, this is important because, of course, there's a lot of issues in Iran right now, right? But one of the factors that I wanted to bring up was if 75% of the crossings are men, and they're coming from Iran, they're coming from Afghanistan, they're coming from Somalia, and it's only recently, like this year, and in the past few months, that Albanian men have been the largest group. But before that was these groups. 75% are men between the ages of 18 and 39. People keep saying, go back to your country and fight. go back to your country and fight.
Mm-hmm.
What I think people are missing is these men that are leaving are at the army, they're at the fighting ages, prime fighting ages. And by depopulating these nations, you're actually bringing an end to conflict quicker. So if you actually want these people out of your country in the long term, admit them in the short term.
Well, yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that's on top of stay out the hell out of their country, stop stabilizing their nations, and leave the people to be. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They will sort out their own mess. They don't need you in their country sorting out their mess.
If you hadn't created the mess in the first place, then maybe they wouldn't be on your doorstep.
So that was one of the aspects that I wanted to look at it and say, look, people keep saying to men of these ages, go back to your country and fight, go back to your country and fight, go back to your country and fight. When actually leaving their countries is actually perhaps a faster way to end the war. Because if you don't have the men to fight, you're going to have to come to peace, or there's going to be an eventual winner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? The other thing is I wanted to mention was actually there are 9 programs that the UK government have designated as safe and legal routes into the UK.
Okay.
Right. And this is where you're going to start to see real issues with the whole system and why the UK government is not serious about asylum seekers, refugees, and its international commitments under treaties. As I said, you've got Tory ministers already saying we want to get rid of the Human Rights Convention so that we can get rid of them.
These people out. Yep.
Right. But within these 9 recognized safe and legal routes, 5 of them are targeted to specific groups. Right. So 5 of the schemes of the 9. So 5 of the 9 are targeted at applicants from Hong Kong, Afghanistan, and Ukraine.
Okay.
So 5 routes for 3 nations. Ukraine and the routes from the Ukraine are only ones that have been added in the past year. Right. So when you look at that, you now have 4 systems for global applicants. And I would even say the Afghanistan one's probably only come about in the past this year, right? So there are 4 now systems available for global applicants for asylum seekers and refugee seekers from around the world, right? The first is the UK residential scheme, right? And here's this. This only opened in 2021. Right. Yep. So prior to that, there were only 3 global schemes. Okay. So now this UK resettlement scheme opened in 2021 with the aim of processing 5,000 applications in its first year.
Go on, it processed 10.
To date, it has only resettled 1,125 people.
You see, like I said, 10. One medallion, 10.
The second scheme is the community sponsorship scheme, right? Okay. And this opened in 2016. Now, unlike the Ukraine scheme, where individuals could take in people, this was where community groups had to sponsor.
So you had to gather a whole group of people to sponsor.
You had to have an established organization, community organization, to sponsor someone.
Who's doing that? Who? Okay. Where are we? I mean, with all due respect, you know, what?
So, in 2021, that scheme only let 144 people into the UK.
What I tell you, 10. Go on, next.
Right. Then you have the Refugee Family Reunion Scheme. And this was established in 2011. And what it was for people who had already been granted refugee status to bring across their spouse and children, right? But the children had to be under the age of 18. So imagine this. You've just turned 19. You are now ineligible to join your family. So now you, as a 19-year-old with nothing, are left in a situation where you are now vulnerable. Well, what do you think is going to happen if you're coming from a war-torn area? You're either getting killed or getting recruited. Right? Now, under this scheme in the UK in 2021, by far this scheme brought across the most. 6,134 people were granted approval. Right? And then the fourth pathway was called the Mandate Resettlement Scheme. And this was established in 1995.
Okay.
Right? Now, this scheme was to resettle refugees who had a close family member in the UK who they could live with.
Okay.
Right? Since 2004.
Okay.
2004.
Okay. It's like nearly 20 years ago. 18 to be precise.
Yep. Only 430 people have been approved through that scheme.
I really hope that our listeners understand that every single country is signed up to a system in order to help refugees. People are signed up. There are mandatory, like there's treaties that are formed in order to help refugees. When you sitting in your house going, oh, those people are coming here, blah, 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 we don't need to take any refugees, blah, blah, blah. No. This is international law requirements for every country. Big and small have different requirements, but every country. And there are some countries that do way more than others. And the UK does way less.
Yeah. So I just wanted to give some real numbers and give some of the access ways in which refugees coming to the UK are granted leave to come to the UK. And the fact that there are 9 pathways, 5 of which are targeted to 3 groups. And of those groups, 2 were only established in the past 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, right. They've only just gotten established.
So 5 that are catering for 3 groups. Of those 5 pathways, I don't know how many were established within the past 12 to 18 months. And so that leaves 4 pathways for the international, the rest of the world, wherever you're fleeing from, that leaves you 4 other pathways. And I've just given you the numbers that those pathways have admitted. So when it comes to refugees, when it comes to asylum seekers, and people are saying we're taking too much, we're doing too much.
Mess.
There are the figures.
Mess. And also this misnomer that all those refugees come and they get the big houses and they're all resettled and taking the money, when the reality is that most of them are coming on pathways in which they are required to live with other people that already have established homes here. So for the minority of people that get into social housing, the minority, very small percentage. Come on, miss me with that. Miss me with that. Miss me with that. I know someone and they got a house and yeah, you know one person, because the reality is that's all that's in the system.
Oh, a refugee comes and they get a house. So what? Why are you mad at them getting a house? Don't be mad at them getting a house. Be mad you didn't get one.
Well, there you go.
And I'm like, those are two completely different things. I know people might get confused over it, but they're two completely different things.
Yeah.
You should be happy somebody got a house. You should be mad it wasn't you. But you shouldn't be mad at the person that got the house.
Yeah.
You should be mad at the people that have created systems where you don't have a house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
Absolutely.
I'm
Absolutely.
mindful of time. Those are some of my news stories. As I said, there's been so much stuff to
There's
cover.
been a lot. I feel like we're on like an episode of The Daily Show when he's like, we just don't have time for that. Like, ain't nobody got time for these news stories. There is a lot happening in the world, and we've covered a lot of different countries this evening. And there are commonality of themes. There are commonality of ideas. There is commonality of oppression. There is a commonality of lies, sadly. And I think that there is more that binds us together than tears us apart sometimes. And this has definitely been one of those weeks where
Get
you
rid of
see.
nations.
Okay, if y'all want to see him do the dark side of nations, y'all tell him, okay? Y'all hit him up on the socials and tell him, because he gonna keep telling us about the dark side of this nation business. So
Hit me up on Twitter, yeah?
And on that note, we're ever so grateful that you like, share, and do the thing and subscribe to the channel. We're so happy with all the feedback that we get week on week. Please keep letting us know so that we can keep bigging you up and saying thank you for all of your support. We do this as a labor of love. He certainly is doing it as a labor of love because he ain't getting paid to do this work. So we're happy to be here and to be educating you on all of these wonderful points. God bless you, and we will see you next time on the dark side. Peace out. It's your point to say bye.
Yeah, you said it.
Okay, bye from him too.